how do you prevent politics from getting corrupted by money? And how do you make it so that the democracy that we have today is representing the many as opposed to just representing the few?
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine you had 150 years of unlimited money flowing into government, flowing into politics and election campaigns, and then all of a sudden in 1971, you had all these rules capping people's maximums on what they could put in. That essentially created PACs, that created political action committees. It really comes down to, do you want a law to pass or not to pass? Do you want someone elected? It's how much money is it worth it for you to do that? Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Imagine Two People podcast. Today we are talking about something a little bit, I would say it's on topic with what's going on right now with the election, but at the same time, I feel like I'm never going to be able to do this topic justice because of how big it is. Originally, the idea was lobbying, talking about like, how do private corporations lobby the government? What is meant by lobbying? And it kind of opened a can of worms when I looked into this because I realized it's not just about lobbying. It's who's funding the lobbyists. It's where does the money go after it reaches these lobbying companies, and what do they do with it? What do you know about lobbying?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say that credit where credit is due. Like, Josh does all the research for every episode. I just show up. So when he asks me, like, what do you know? It's legit what I know at the moment. It's as if you were asking anybody on the street, like, what they know. But also, it's been a week of dinners of talking about this.
That's true. It's my bad.
No, it's okay. But it's like it's been taking you a whole week absorbing a bunch of information. So, you know, kudos to you. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
What I know as a person from the street is lobbying is the act of private companies or private groups going into the political scene to search for their or advocate for their own interests. So either they try to get bills passed or regulations taken down or changed, or, they try to support a candidate or the other that will benefit them. So you have, for instance, if you work in agriculture, you might lobby for subsidies,
farm subsidies and things like that.
Exactly, because your company needs it.
Yeah.
And then you have like people dedicated to research on it, to advocate on it, to go there and basically just protest, but more organized and more funded, and they can play a part on how politics go, because some of these lobbyists are tiny and some of them are really big.
Right. And that's the whole idea. It's like, how do you make your voice heard? And if you've ever gone to a local city town hall meeting, which I haven't, I don't know who these people are that are probably older people who have a lot more time.
Yeah.
But if you ever go to a town hall meeting and you're making your voice heard and you stand up at the microphone, you give your opinion on what to do about something happening in your town, whether it's like a new piece of legislation or a abandoned lot or abandoned building, and you're all trying to decide like if you want to make it a park or if you want to turn it into a Whole Foods, and you're giving your opinion, you're essentially lobbying for your own interests.
Yes.
And you're one person lobbying in a very legal way, in the way that the founders intended. The founders intended that you would be able to have your voice heard and that you have free speech and that you can petition government and all these good things. That's the idea with democracy.
Yeah.
I feel like where things get really hairy is where does that go too far?
Yeah.
And how do you prevent politics from getting corrupted by money?
Right.
And how do you make it so that the democracy that we have today is representing the many as opposed to just representing the few? Yeah,
it's not skewed by big companies that have big pockets, because one thing's for me to go like, well, I want this because this is what I believe in, I'm one person. The other thing is for $1 billion company just like say, if you guys don't pass this, this is what we're going to do, this is what's going to happen. And they have so much power to skew what happens in legislation. Right. And I feel like everyone listening to this will completely agree that the idea of a billionaire walking into Congress and saying, hey, I'll pay off these 10 senators $1 million each to give my automobile company or pharma company or whatever favorable tax breaks that'll pay off in a few years for me. Mm-hmm. Like everyone would say that's bribery, that's corruption, that's a quid pro quo. Right. And that's been illegal since the
country was founded in 1776. It's written in the Constitution that you can't have corruption of government with private money and things like that. The problem is, no matter what we legislate, companies will always find a way to get around it.
Yes.
With any type of loophole.
It's a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah, because, you know, what if, for example, in that town hall example, you had a bunch of money, you know, you had a successful small business or whatever, and you had money, or you just saved from your own job and you have like $10,000 in cash, and you say, well, I want to do a campaign, and you start reserving airspace on different channels, and you start talking about like why you want a Whole Foods in this one lot.
Right.
You're talking about like other things that they could potentially put in and how bad that would be, and you're essentially lobbying. You're creating a little ad campaign funded by your own money.
Yeah.
And most people would probably say that's fine too. If you want to spend your own money doing a legal thing, that's covered by free speech.
Yeah.
How far will that go, though?
It becomes like a, you know, that scene on The Office with Dwight where it goes like, you know, can it be 2 months? Like, possibly.
Yeah.
Can it be 8 months? I see that happening.
It's like 12 years. He's like, I could see that's a very real possibility. It's like, if you keep going.
Yeah, you keep going.
So
until
what is the limit? You know,
Yeah.
could you, let's say if you're a billionaire and you really want that Whole Foods, you know, you're just selfish, you have too much money, you just dominate the ad space, or you run smear campaigns, or you figure out the elected officials that have the most power on that, and then you find their college roommates and you hire private investigators to figure out their family members that are susceptible, and you start slowly getting these congressmen or these local city council officials all getting spammed by their family members saying, we need to get this Whole Foods in here. And technically getting a family member to talk to a member of the government is not illegal, you know, but that's a lot of legwork. One person, it's very difficult to do that. But if you have a lot of money, you can hire a lobbyist company that will do any of this for you. And that's what they do for a living. It's almost like a lobbying company, and it's $1 billion industry, by the way. There's hundreds of them. They almost have an army of advocates.
Yes.
So they turn speaking in front of city councils into their full-time job, and they're really good at it. They can do campaign strategies. They have marketing teams and marketing experts that can make banners and social media.
Right.
They usually have a well-established network of contacts in DC to get what they want passed.
You know, because the lobbyists are hired by companies. So can the company fund this research and then they use it in, you know, their lobbying to say, see, like this industry is actually doing all this good for society. That's why
Absolutely.
we want,
That happens all the time. That happened in the 60s with the big sugar industries, with Domino Sugars and things. They had several of these companies that got together. They pooled money together and they created like what is called the American Sugar Association. And they had the American Sugar Association lobby to get their laws passed, to get things that were favorable for them. And what that ended up looking like was they actually bribed Harvard nutritional scientists to create a meta study. It wasn't even research, it was just researching all the available data, and they excluded anything that was showing sugar bad.
Right.
And then they highlighted everything that was showing sugar's fine. Like people that eat a little more sugar actually were healthier on average.
Yeah.
We know that's not true.
Yeah.
But when you selectively cherry pick studies,
Yes.
you're going to get that variance.
Yeah.
And so they ended up essentially creating natural fats like butter and tallow and lard, whatever. They created fats as the boogeyman for what we know today sugar is actually responsible for.
Right.
And that created horrible federal health legislation with the food pyramid that destroyed our nutritional understanding for decades.
Yes.
It corrupted what doctors and nutritionists were recommending.
Right.
It corrupted what people were putting money into.
Yeah.
And it was a horrible misuse of lobbying.
Yeah.
And we know that today.
Yeah, but most people still don't. Most people still eat the same things, and, you know, they behave with food similarly than people did 40 years ago because it was so powerful, you know, the campaigns to make you eat certain things or avoid certain things, that until this day, like, you know, my grandmother, until she passed away, she ate a certain way that was the way recommended. And this is why, you know, it gets, the older you get, like the more conspiracy theorist you get, you know, because you realize that a lot of these experts, their money has to come from somewhere. So nobody out there putting studies out is just doing it from the goodness of their heart. You need money to run a lab. You need money to do research. You need money to publish things. So who is funding these studies and what they choose to put out? Because they can fund a study and go like, yeah, we're not going to pay for this to be published because it doesn't show what I wanted to show. So you realize that a lot of information out there is biased.
It's been going on for hundreds of years, and every country, its money controls pretty much everything that you see or hear in some way or another. If I were to write a book about how the world works, and I've thought about it for years and years, it would be called Follow the Money. And when it comes to lobbying and politics and things like that, it's definitely the case.
So the question that you started, like the big question that you had to start this whole podcast was, how do you keep money out of politics?
Right. I mean, people don't realize for 80% of the history of the country, from 1776 all the way up until now, there's been very little keeping you call it big money and special interest groups from affecting politics. I think the very first piece of legislation was 1907 with FDR. He released the Tillman Act, which was primarily responding to angry citizens complaining about how these big companies were influencing politics more than their own individual vote. And so it was aimed at reducing the influence of companies on funding elections.
Right.
And so it said, okay, if you're a private company, you can't contribute to an election. If you want to do that as an individual, you can. Before 1907, a citizen or a company could give as much money as you want. You know that video of Bernie Sanders in the old jacket being like, I am once again asking for your financial support.
Yeah.
That's the way it was from the beginning all the way up until now in 2024. And so money could flow freely. 1907, now companies can't. And so they found ways around it. They found ways around it with PACs and things like that, political action committees and things like that.
But companies can still donate money, just not a lot of money.
So companies actually can't donate any money directly into a political candidate.
Cannot?
Cannot.
Oh, okay.
As of 1907. I mean, it was very loosely enforced. It was mostly symbolic legislation. There was no regulatory enforcement structure. And so things basically went on the same way that they did for the next 70 years, regardless of that. And so it changed almost nothing.
Okay.
And so it wasn't really until, I want to say, the 70s. Nixon had the Watergate scandal in 71. And that's when people started realizing, people are spending election financing out of their own campaigns to do sketchy things, like pay off bribes and things like that and cover things up. And they're like, we need to have rules on what these election campaigns can actually spend their money on, because we don't want it to be done on anything illegal. You would think you wouldn't need a rule for that.
So, if I have a company, my company is called Better Tallo. It's actually a real company. I have a company called Better Tallo. If Better Tallo wants to fund you are a candidate for something, and I want to donate some money to you, I can't do it on the name of Better Tallo.
Correct.
But I can do it in the name of Anna.
Yes.
And as Anna, I can donate like a few thousands, right?
You can donate as much as you want all the way through 1971. But when 1971 came out, they created the FEC, the FECA Act, which basically limited the amount of money you, Anna, could contribute to a campaign. It was the first time in history where there was an actual limit on the amount of money you could put into a campaign. Before 1971, if you had $1 billion, you could give $1 billion to a campaign. Now it was like $3,300 per person per election cycle, one in the general, one in the primary. So it's like $6,600 per person or whatever.
I see.
So that changed everything. That was just imagine you had 150 years of unlimited money flowing into government, flowing into politics and election campaigns, and then all of a sudden in 1971, you had all these rules capping people's maximums on what they could put in. That essentially created PACs, that created political action committees. They were like, well, if I can only put in a certain amount of money as a person, what if I create a separate legal entity and then use that legal entity to also contribute to? This basically continued for another 30 years until, and I'm looking this up, I don't know this off the top of my head, there's so much case law that goes into this, the 2002 McCain-Feingold Act. And so basically what that was said, we're not going to allow corporations, even indirectly, to be contributing to campaigns. They wanted to shut down PACs. They wanted to shut down this, they call it the soft money loophole, where corporations can still find a way to put unlimited money through PACs into these campaigns.
Yeah.
And so they tried to shut that down. And it worked for a little bit. It worked until like 8 years later in 2010. There was this famous Citizens United versus SEC Supreme Court case. And what they decided was it was constitutionally protected under the First Amendment, your free speech, to donate money to any political campaign that you choose, whether you're a corporation or a person, all of that's considered free speech. And so that reopened the soft money loophole. And that's when super PACs were born for the first time. It's 2010.
I see.
Because before that, they were just regular PACs, and they had all these contribution limits. You could only give so much to the super PAC, and in turn, they could only give so much to a political campaign. Super PACs were born and saying, you can give us as much money as you want. We're not allowed to give it to a campaign, but we can mirror the campaign strategy and do everything that the campaign's doing.
Yeah, we can help them out.
We can help them out. And so that's what they do. And that goes into our conversation before on how they do that with the revolving door between the staffers. And they also put their campaign strategy on their website as publicly available information. And so the super PACs can just go onto the website of the campaign that they're supporting, see their publicly available information, copy pasta, and they're like, well, I didn't directly communicate with this campaign. I'm doing this all independently, and it's completely legal.
As if you were going to Wikipedia and just copying something that it's there and you put it on your paper.
Exactly. You know, and that's protected under the SEC or under the 2010 Supreme Court decision of Citizens versus United. And that holds true today. That still, to this day, has not been struck down. You know, it's only 14 years later. In the scope of U.S. history, it's not very long. But so far, corporations still have an almost unlimited influence monetarily on elections through super PACs.
So what is the difference between a PAC, a super PAC? Are they the same thing? Like me saying like it's a PAC or a super PAC, or is it the
They're
size?
similar. PACs came first. PACs can directly contribute to a campaign. So let's say you really like Bernie Sanders and you gave him all the money you're allowed to give him, which is $3,300, and then in the general election, if he made it past, another $3,300.
Okay.
Say you want to give him even more money. You can give money to a Bernie Sanders favorable PAC with the agreement that they will contribute to Bernie Sanders' campaign. I think it's like they had $6,000 per candidate or $5,000 per candidate. That's what a PAC can do. And so that's a way of getting around this maximum per person. A super PAC, you can give an unlimited amount of money to the super PAC, and they can contribute it not directly to the campaign, but they can essentially mirror the campaign strategy and do everything that the campaign does. And so the law says that a super PAC and a PAC, they can only exist and operate legally if they work independently and they don't communicate directly with the campaign.
Right.
The PACs and the super PACs that are very pro Bernie Sanders and are rerunning all these ads and running smear campaigns against his opponents, they're not allowed to talk to the campaign staff that are running Bernie Sanders legally. But there's ways of getting around that.
Yes.
You could have a campaign staffer that works at Bernie Sanders' re-election campaign, and they could leave the campaign legally, they quit, and the next day they could work at one of these super PACs and explain the whole strategy to them.
And it's not illegal
It's
at
not
all.
illegal because they didn't directly communicate. He left one job and he went to another. So you get this revolving door of campaign staffers who leave the actual official campaign and they work for these super PACs so that you can share strategies and basically work as an extension of the official campaign.
Which happens in a lot of things, right? That like people that work in the government and then they go out and work for private industries, which are the industries that they use to regulate.
Oh, it's nuts.
So they know everything.
It's regulatory capture that happens all the time. I mean, get this. Back in the 70s, you had 1 out of every 33 Congress members who left Congress would go and work for a lobbyist. So it was like pretty rare. It would happen, but it wasn't everyone. It was 1 out of 33. Today, it's 1 or 2 out of 3.
Oh, wow.
So almost every congressman and congresswoman who leaves Congress eventually ends up in a lobbyist organization because they get super high paying salaries and they do almost nothing. They share their contacts, they share their strategies, they share their political currencies and things like that. And that is extremely valuable when you're trying to figure out how decisions are made in the White House and in Congress.
What is the difference between a super PAC or a PAC and just any normal company? You know, why can't Nestle donate money or do like the whole independent campaign for a candidate? Or can they? Like if I'm Nestle and I want to run a campaign ad for, you know, Kamala Harris, can I do that?
I think you can. I think you just can't contribute directly to their campaign because of the FEC campaign finance laws. What most of them do in practice, if they want to fund a candidate, they give money to a super PAC that is known to align with that candidate.
And the super PAC, like, do they pay taxes?
I don't think so. I think they're a separate legal entity where they're able to act as a middleman. It's essentially a shared bank account where anyone can contribute to it, and you usually have a board that runs the donations and where it goes out. So you have super PACs for big pharma, you have super PACs for defense and guns, you have super PACs for mining and agriculture, super PACs. Whatever the topic is, you usually have a super PAC. And there's broad super PACs. There's conservative and progressive super PACs. And so you, instead of doing all the work of thinking like, who do I want to support? You know, if I have $1 billion or $1 million or whatever, you can give it to one that you're like, well, this is a progressive super PAC. And so they're going to do all the effort of figuring out who are the most progressive candidates and support them instead of me.
I see.
You know, because you can only, as an individual, let's say you're a billionaire, you can only give, like I said, $3,300 per candidate.
Right.
And then you have to do all the research yourself. It makes more sense just to give it to a progressive super PAC if you find yourself aligning with progressive values. Also, that's a way to get around the campaign contribution limits that were in 71.
So basically, people find a way to do.
People always find a way. I mean, that opened up the soft money loopholes. So, for example, in 2019, there was roughly $3.5 billion that was put into lobbying from all these different agencies. And there was also about $14 billion in political contributions. So it's a multi-billion-dollar industry churning. And it really comes down to, do you want a law to pass or not to pass? Do you want someone elected? It's how much money is it worth it for you to do that? And most of those campaign contributions, by the way, I think it's something, it's all estimations, no one knows for sure, but it's between like 60 and 70% are from individuals still. So the lion's share is still grassroots as opposed to corporations, but they still have a massive amount of influence in politics. Also, another thing people don't really talk about much is that Congress members have a lot of help from these lobbyists. Lobbyists give a lot of assistance legally. They're almost like a free legal team that members of Congress use with certain things. Whether, let's say there's a member of Congress that wants to write a certain law, they could have some of these lobbyists come and help them write it or draft it. I mean, because think about it this way. In 2024, there are so many different topics that a congressman or a House rep needs to know and never knows about. Like, how do you explain to a 70-year-old senator AI and social media and privacy rules and all this? Remember when they started to interview Mark Zuckerberg in Congress, and they also interviewed like a Google CEO, and they were just showing their ignorance.
Yeah,
with
the questions for
I mean, they just couldn't wrap their 70-year-old minds around it. And so what'll happen is these tech companies like Google will spend a ton of money creating these lobbyist groups, which are a group of legal tech experts who understand the rules, know how to break them down for some of these older senators, and then they can explain it in ways that they'll understand. Say, this is what this law is about. This is why it would be good. This is why it would be bad. But you know, these lobbyists are going to be biased. They're going to be biased to whoever funded them. And so they're going to highlight why a bill is good if they want it to pass, or highlight why a bill is bad if they don't. But the congressmen also know that too. And so there's kind of this give and take, and they understand that they're going to be biased. But if there was ever a lobbyist that really grossly misrepresented a bill or lied to them, they're not going to work with them anymore. So it would sour the relationship. There's a ton of back and forth between these lobbyists and Congress right now at this moment with like understanding rules, writing legislation. Some of these legal lobbyists will literally write the bills for the senator.
Is it possible, for instance, like if a super PAC can indirectly cooperate for someone's campaign, and I can donate as much money as I want for a super PAC, and as a company I can do that too, right?
No, yeah, it can come from
anywhere. So if I'm a big company, for like, you know, if I'm a drug company and I am trying to get like this legislation that is going to help, like some drug that I have and that I want to be passed, can I indirectly threaten to not contribute to a super PAC that will get you elected?
Oh yeah.
So because that's a way of me like offering you a favor without offering you a favor.
No, that's absolutely what happens if you're a very Tea Party conservative candidate and you're promising lower taxes, for example. You know, because there's disclosure rules, exactly how your campaign is funded, where all their funds are coming from.
Right.
And you also know the super PACs that are spending a lot of money to help your campaign. If there's a conservative like a lower tax super PAC that really helps you with a lot of campaign ads, and then suddenly you increase a capital gains tax, you can guarantee that super PAC that really helped your last campaign aren't going to help you. And in fact, you can be guaranteed that they're going to fund whoever your opponent is instead.
I see.
And so imagine if you're in Congress, you know every bill that you vote on, yay or nay, you can almost see your campaign fund shift, and you can see these super PACs. It's almost like the super PACs are in the room without being in the room.
Yes.
And you know, if you vote against this tax bill or for this tax bill, you either lost a bunch of super PACs or you gained a bunch of super PACs. That's your livelihood at that point.
Yes.
It's like, do you want to stay elected?
Yeah.
Do you want to stick to your guns and potentially get ousted because you lost all your money?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about, you know, like, what do we think about this? Do we think this is something that should exist? Do we think that, you know, is there any other possibility? Or do we think that this is right? And, you know, the question that we started with, which is, how do you keep money out of politics to influence politics that much? The answer is you can't.
And it's impossible for it to prevent human nature from getting around it.
And that's what it is, because humans are still humans. So if money influences humans in any given point in history, it's always going to. So you can't just take the human nature out of human nature. You know, it's always going to be there. So if we change the rules like they did, well, you can't donate more than this. Okay, like they go around it, and either you have, like, you know, many people, you just fund individuals to fund the campaign. Like if they said, like, no more super PACs, we can't have it anymore, we would find tomorrow a way to go around it. Like, let me just find 1 million people. I'll give you money. You give them money. Like, and that's how I'm going to fund whoever I want to fund. Like, there's always a way, just because people who do what people who do.
Yeah, they would use nonprofits instead. They already do that in some extent. There's something called dark money. So we all heard of 501c3s. That's a nonprofit for
Have we?
churches. Oh, I'm sorry. So for 501c3s, like a church, you can get donations from its members and they don't have to pay taxes on it because it's a not-for-profit. And so it's supposed to be a good thing, like the Red Cross and whatever. And you have these very honorable organizations that are saying we're just trying to help people, and so IRS gives them a tax exemption. So you also have 501c4s, which are also nonprofits. They're also tax deductible, and they're non-charitable, so they promote social welfare.
Okay.
And as long as their primary cause is to promote social welfare, they can also contribute to campaigns and promote lobbying for a certain candidate. But here's the crazy thing. They're exempt from disclosing where the sources of money come from.
Okay.
Which is bizarre. So it's basically a black box. You and I can give, let's say, $1 million to a 501c4. And as long as we know that 501c4 is going to support our candidate, and we can be sure that no one will ever know that we ever gave money to that campaign through the 501c4. So it's called dark money for a reason, because you don't know who the donors are.
Wow.
And it was never what the intention of the 501c4 was. The IRS had specific reasons for allowing that, and it's sort of being exploited for political gain. I would personally close that. I think that's a low-hanging fruit on what we could close. Just for the reason that it's a national security concern. I mean, at this point, you could have Russia, China, or one of our other many adversaries out there funding some 501c4 that they had grown domestically in order to subvert an election or to create dissonance or to get whoever they want elected.
Yes.
And so, anyway, that boggles my mind that people can still do that in 2024. It seems like a very obvious thing we should be getting rid of. But the rest is very, very gray area, because how do you prevent people from spending their own money, or corporations and extensions spending their own money, indirectly funding a campaign or helping a campaign, without also stifling their freedom of speech that's given to them in the First Amendment? It's extremely difficult.
And that's the discussion that, you know, we have for almost every topic in politics and in life in society, right? Because you can make things different depending on what you're willing to do. So there's a lot of people who say, you know, like, everybody who doesn't do this, like, should go to jail. But that can go wrong very fast. But it's just, what are you willing to give up? For instance, we could make the country technically safer if we all gave permission for the government just, like, to search your stuff, look into, like, you have no privacy at all. They know exactly where you are at all times. But do you really want that? Like, are you willing to give that up? And is that a thing that you trust is only going to be used for what you consider good? because people don't understand that we all have different versions of what good is. So whenever someone says like, it's for the common good, like, what do you mean by good? Because we are very different people, and what you consider a good thing might not be what I consider a good thing. So a lot of the conversations that we have about public life is, what are we willing to give up? And whenever you implement a law that is not only like accomplishing what was meant to accomplish, but it's accomplishing a whole array of things that were either unintended or people are going to take advantage of it, and you didn't see that coming. It's just like, oh wait, now they can do that because I opened a door for things that I didn't realize I was opening a door for.
Every country does it a little differently. There's a lot of countries that have more strict campaign finance laws and more regulation on lobbying. There's a lot of countries that have a whole lot less. But every time I look into one of these topics, I usually have a similar thought in my head, which is I'm very apprehensive to change anything fundamentally because I know I don't fully understand all the implications that would have.
Right.
And I also like the results that this system got us in the first place. So it's a question of, do you really feel confident enough in your convictions that you'd be willing to roll the dice on fundamentally changing the country that gave you the most freedom and quality of life out of any country ever?
Right. You don't know like what part of the success of the country was played by having these laws in place.
No idea.
For us to change it.
There's a fundamental flaw in democracies, which is, how do you prevent people from voting themselves free stuff until the deficit explodes to the point where the currency is meaningless and you lose your competitive advantage? That's a real problem. And I'm not saying this is the case, but maybe you have corporations having more influence, acting almost as a counterbalance to a democratic pitfall where instead of free stuff, that could potentially be a threat to the free market, and the free market, by definition in capitalism, will have more economic power to be able to leverage against that selfish will of the people. I think that it would be impossible to quantify what percent of power in Washington is from the will of the people versus the will of special interests.
I think another way to look at it is, people don't usually see big corporations with good eyes because it just sounds wrong, like this big corporation. But the thing is, the government is the biggest corporation of all. So basically, you have big corporation that doesn't respond to anybody, because you can say, oh, the government responds to the people. Like, really? Do they really? Like, do we have like the Epstein list? Do we have, like, all that there's so much that the government hides,
right? And
then they just like cover, and nobody's going to arrest them. They are the people that arrest others. Like if we produce like a fake note of $1, we're arrested by counterfeiting money. But if they do it, they're just printing more money to make the economy run, and it's completely fine for them. So they are the people that are the biggest corporation that have no shareholders. Like,
they're a legal mob in a way.
Exactly. So if you have that on one side, then you should at least have the possibility to have that on the other side too. Like, you have these private companies that will sometimes go against the government, and they actually have the power to do something when you and I individually don't. So it's not that we're for big corporations, it's that the government is a big corporation.
And the government is just a collection of people, right? And
right.
So people themselves are inherently flawed.
Yes.
And so just like there's a checks and balances between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, there's a checks and balances that exist between the government and private corporations in a capitalistic system.
Exactly.
And capitalism by far has lifted the most people out of poverty out of any other system in the world.
Yes.
Who said it? I want to say it was also Winston Churchill who said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Yes. Yeah.
So having democracy, having capitalism, that was the rarest combination. It had never been done until 1776.
Yeah.
And then we got all of this. We got Silicon Valley. We got iPhones. We got Hollywood. And then we export all of that all over the world. We have DoorDash and Netflix, and we have more comfort than we know what to do with, to the point that it's probably making us unhealthy and soft and not, losing our competitive edge. All I'm trying to say is there's probably a expiration date on everything we got going on here, but let's just enjoy it while we have it. But it's just such a wild ride looking at the history of money influencing politics, the fact that every rule that they tried to implement, there was a way to get around it. And even today in 2024, lobbying is a billion-dollar industry. There's probably all these sketchy things happening that we barely hear about until there's some expose in the Washington Post, or there's some whistleblower that calls the New York Times.
Right.
And then we start getting a little glimpse into it. So what do we even do? It's like, what are the alternative options that we have? There are other countries that try different things. One of the ideas is to disincentivize big influence of money. You can publicly fund campaigns, and you could either give a certain amount of money to anyone that runs for office, and that's the limit, and that's all they can use, or they match dollars for contributing donations. So if you give $100 to Bernie Sanders, they'll match that $100. And they can also match only small donations, not big donations. You could ban big donations. What do you think about publicly funded campaign financing?
Oh, I'm completely against it. I'm completely against public funding anything that doesn't go to everybody. And that's usually everything ever made, right? Like if you have, in my country, I'm from Brazil, we have publicly funded campaigns. So if you are running for a public office, even locally, you get this check to run your campaign, and we are paying for it. So what happens very quickly is you have a lot of people who have no interest in running for local office, but they run because they just want to take that check and go home and spend with whatever they want to spend, and just like make one ad and just like put their little number and pretend that they're running, but they actually are not. So I'm against any idea that will make everybody pay for something that only a few people use against their will. Like you can be cherishable. You can, fund an idea that you really believe in. You can give to others. But doing that compulsively through the state, I don't believe in that.
No, I mean, I completely agree. Another idea that people put out there is completely banning PACs and super PACs, basically closing that soft money loophole. But that would require amending the Constitution with the Supreme Court decision. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. Yeah. But even if it did, I don't think it would help anything. So I like the idea. I don't think it would work. Yeah. I think that another loophole would come about immediately. There are people who really hate super PACs, and I can understand why.
Yeah, I mean, you can hate something and see like the benefit of it going away. But also, like, I'm always eerie about ideas that, it's how about the world should work and not how the world actually does work. We can have, these utopian ideas of how the world should be. Like, we shouldn't have this. Okay, great. But we do. And if we don't have this, we're going to have another version of this. So I have a problem with ideas that just seem like you're counting too much and hoping that people will do the right thing.
It's trying to legislate out human nature, which I don't believe is possible. No. I think that instead of a top-down legislative action, I think you should just create incentives. You allow people to have the most freedom possible, but you allow incentive structures. If you do this thing, you go to jail, or you have to pay a fine.
Right to jail.
Right to jail right away. You do this other thing, you get benefited. The reason I love free market is the more you benefit other people, the more you benefit yourself. And so it's built into it that you have to serve to be served.
Right.
There's also lobbying reform where they say, maybe we should just end lobbying. Again, I don't know if you could ever truly end lobbying because it's such a broad conversation.
Like, what is lobbying? Like, can I, as a private person, just advocate for my own, because that's what democracy is. So how can you stop corporation from going through people and doing that,
Exactly. There's others that want to end the revolving door between Congress members leaving government and then going to work in these lobbying organizations. Right. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think because that creates a conflict of interest.
Yes.
Not just later, they could say, well, it's a free country. You can work for whoever you want. And I'm saying, well, if 1 or 2 out of the 3 congressmen or congresswomen are leaving Congress and becoming lobbyists, that's going to influence you while you're in public service.
Right.
When you're in government and you're saying yes or no on certain bills, you're going to be thinking about your next step, especially if your election cycle is next year. And you think, well, I have to retire, maybe at your term limit, or if you have no term limit, you think I got to get reelected or whatever. It's going to influence you thinking about your own future and how you're going to put bread on the table or buy your next beach house.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, I know this this specific lobbying organization is very pro this, and so
Yeah.
I should get on their side so that I can get a great job later.
Exactly.
You know, so it's going to influence you, and I don't like that.
Yes.
I think that that's probably anti-democratic, and I would end that. I would say that if you work in government, great. No one's forcing you to work in government. It's a very specific job, and very few people do it. But if you do it, you shouldn't be working in influencing government as your permanent job afterwards.
Yes.
There's also ranked choice voting, the idea that you could select your preference of your first candidate, and then your second candidate, and then your third candidate.
Which you talked about the last podcast.
Right. And the whole idea behind that is if you have a preferential voting system where you could rank your favorite person first, it could make it so that it's not so much a high money political campaign winner takes all strategy where usually the campaign that has the most money can get their name out to the most people. People could have a very small campaign. They could have one where they just have a YouTube presence or whatever, and they make videos like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm running for Congress, and this is what I stand on. And that's pretty easy and free to do and very low cost. And so you could have a very cheap campaign and people like you and they think, oh, well, this guy probably has no chance, but I like him the most. And so they could put him as number one and then put the big name as number two.
Right.
And so how that works is they'll count up every one of the first choice voters first. Like they count up every ballot on who they picked as the first vote. And if any candidate got 51% of the vote or more, then they'll automatically get elected. But if no one has 50% at that point, they eliminate the candidate with the least amount of votes.
I see.
And then everyone who chose that eliminated candidate as their number one, they add up all their number two choices.
I see.
So let's say you voted for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had the least amount of votes and he got eliminated. They'll look at your ballot and say, well, who did she vote for next? And then maybe you voted for Nikki Haley or something. You know, then they'll count that up and they'll continue that process until one candidate eventually gets over 50% of the vote.
I see.
And so that's how it works.
I see.
But
That's very interesting.
I like it, actually. I think that shows a lot of promise. I need to do a lot more research into it before I would wave my magic wand, hypothetically, and change the system permanently. But it sounds like a good idea because then you could vote on principle and you're not just voting for who you think has the best chance at winning because they have $1 billion campaign.
Right.
But anyway, so long story short, I don't think you'll ever be able to perfectly legislate out the influence of big money and special interest groups in politics. There's no way to create a law that someone else just can't find a loophole around that. But I think there's some smart, small reform steps you could make to make it a little better and a little harder to do these things that most people agree are bad for politics. Anyway, so just something to get you guys thinking. Next time you get one of those political ads in the mail or you're trying to watch a YouTube video and you get spammed by Trump or Kamala talking about their donation strategies and stuff, you know, ask yourself, where did it come from? Did it come from the official campaign, or did it come from a super PAC, or did it come from a lobbyist organization that was funded by a super PAC, inadvertently funded by the campaign itself? And so these are weird things to think about, but then you'll start seeing it everywhere if you look for it.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's all we have for today. I wish I had better answers for this incredibly complex question.
Okay, we just put a light on the issues. You know, we're here every week, not trying to solve the world's problems, but just talking about them.
Just talking about them and giving our best shot at it.
Yeah.
Anyway, leave your comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. If any of these ideas like ranked choice voting or ending super PACs or lobbying reform or whatever, like I would love to hear from you guys because I'm in my own bubble of what I looked up myself. And so please tell me why I'm wrong and I would love to learn. Until next time, we'll see you guys later in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.